Hey everyone! In this video I'm going to show you how to crochet this cardigan. If it looks a bit familiar, that's probably because it is. This cardigan actually started off as a vest and I decided to make and attach sleeves. I think that these sleeves could work for a number of different patterns, but if you're wanting to attach it to a vest that looks like this, just make sure that you're measuring the arm because you'll definitely need to add length to get over the shoulder bit, whereas the one that I used already had a shoulder section to it. But if you were just wanting to make the sleeve, this is the timestamp that you'll need to go to, and I will also leave chapters in the description. As always, if you have any questions, leave them below and I will try to get back to you. For this cardigan, I used 600 grams of medium weight yarn, an 8mm hook, 6mm hook, stitch markers, scissors, 3 buttons and a darning needle. This is also the 10cm gauge for the slip stitch section. Okay, so to start you're going to grab your 8mm hook and the end of the yarn and make a slip knot. Now we're going to insert the hook. For me making a small, I'm going to chain up 45. This is the number of chains that you'll need to do depending on your size, as well as the centimetre and inch measurements in case you're using a different size hook and yarn. But if you would like to make your top a bit longer, you can add a few stitches to that, and if you would like to make it more cropped, you could take away some stitches from that. But otherwise, go ahead and chain up 45. Alright, so now you've got your chain up of 45. We're going to skip that last chain that we did and use that as our turning chain. So we're going to go into the next chain along, the second one from the hook, and do a slip stitch. So for that you just insert, yarn over, pull through, and then pull through again. So now we're just going to go down the rest of the row doing our slip stitches. This is the crochet stitch that looks a fair bit like knitting, and while it is time consuming, it definitely looks cool when it's done. So just go ahead going all the way down, doing slip stitches into every chain, and in the end you will have 44 stitches in this row. That's 44 stitches if you're also making a small. If you're making any of the other sizes, this is the number of stitches that you will have, as well as the centimetre and inch measurements. And you'll notice that the centimetre and inch measurements are a fair bit smaller than the foundation chain. The slip stitches do tend to pull the foundation chain a bit shorter, so just measure it after you've done your first row or two to make sure that your measurements are still on par if you are using a different size hook and yarn. And I'm just doing my last slip stitch, and now we're going to chain up 1 and turn around. So now for this row we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do slip stitches, but we're going to go into the back loop only. So you can see there's this sort of V. The part of the V that's closest to your body is the front loop, and the one that's furthest away is the back loop. So we're going to go through that back loop only, and we're not going to go into the turning chain. So we're going to go into that first stitch, in through the back loop only, and we're going to do a slip stitch. So now we're going to go down the rest of the row going into the back loop only with our slip stitches, and we're going to do 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And when you get to the end, we're going to do the same thing we did last, and we're going to chain up 1, turn around and come back down. So you need to keep going until you have reached the end of row 4. So we're not counting the foundation chain as a row, so I've finished my first row and this is my second row. After this row I'm going to do 2 more rows and join back in at the end of the row because we're going to do an increase, but I will show you what to do. So join back in at the end of row 4, having done 44 back loop slip stitches in every row. So now I've made it to the end of row 4 and I just have that one last stitch to go, and we're just going to do 2 slip stitches into that same back loop just there. So go ahead and do 1 back loop slip stitch, and now back into that same back loop, another back loop slip stitch. So we've just done an increase of 1. Now we're going to chain up, turn around, and go back to doing rows of just 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So we're not going to do any increases in this row. So this is going to be the pattern for the next little while, basically doing an increase at the end of every 4th row. So the first 3 rows will have no increase or decrease, and then the 4th row will have an increase at the end of the row.
These are the row counts for each of the sizes, as well as the centimetre and inch measurements if you're using a different yarn or hook size. So for an extra small, you'll need to do 18 rows, a small is 20, a medium is 22, a large is 24, an extra large is 26, 2XL is 28, and a 3XL is 30. So if you're using a different hook and yarn size, just make this panel as wide as you need to make it until you reach the centimetre or inch measurements that I've given for the size that you want to make.
So you can go ahead and do as many rows as you need to do for your size. For me, I'm making it in a size small, so I am going to go up until the end of row 20. So I'll be doing an increase on row 4, 8, 12, 16 and on row 20, which is where I will meet you. So join back in when you've done as many rows as you need to do for your size. So once you've made it to the end of that row that you are working up to, it's flat at the bottom and it's got a bit of an angled top because of the increases we've done on every 4th row. Up until this point, it's exactly the same for both of the front panels and the back panels, so it doesn't matter what panel you're working on, you're going to do this exact thing every time with the exact same number of rows and stitches. And I am up to the end of row 20, which for me is an increase row, but your last row might not be an increase row. But I'm going to do my increase into that last stitch. So now for the back panel, you're just going to do rows with no increases or decreases. So I'm now going to turn around and it's going to be exactly the same as all the rows that we did previously that don't have any increases. And you're just going to go ahead and do 54 rows for a small, and these are the number of rows that you need to do for the other sizes.
For an extra small, you'll need to do 48 rows, a small is 54 rows, a medium is 60 rows, a large is 66 rows, extra large is 72 rows, 2XL is 78 rows, and 3XL is 94 rows. And again, if you're using a different yarn and hook size and your top is measuring a bit differently to mine, you can keep going until you reach the centimetre or the inch measurement for the size that you want to make.
So once you get to the end of this row, you'll chain up 1, turn around, and continue going back and forward with no increases until you have done as many rows in this section as you need to. So once you've finished your rows, your back panel should be looking something like this. So this is our first section here, which for me I did 20 rows, and then I've got my straight across back section, which for me making a small was 54 rows, but that will just be dependent on your size. So now basically what we have to do, so I'll zoom out a little bit here, is we're just going to mirror what we did on this side and we're going to do it on the other side. So basically we're going to be doing a 1 decrease for every 4th row to mirror what was on this side, but you'll need to start on the same number that you ended on. So for me, I ended on an increase row, so that means I'm going to need to start on a decrease row, and then I'm going to do 3 rows with no decreases, and then the 4th row is going to have a decrease. And that's going to be the same no matter what size you do, so however many decreases you did for this side, you'll need to do that for that side, and I will put that up on the screen. Basically, because I ended with the increase, we're going to start off with a decrease. So I've chained up 1, and I'm turning around, and now into those first 2 back loops I'm going to do a decrease. So I'm going to insert into that first back loop, yarn over, pull through, and then straight into that second back loop I'm going to insert, yarn over, pull through, and then I'm going to pull through 2. So that is a slip stitch back loop decrease. So now I'm just going to go ahead the rest of the row as normal. And so for the next 3 rows, I'm not going to do any increases or decreases. I'm just going to do rows with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch of the previous row. But then when I get to that 5th row. So this is row 1. I'm going to do 1, and then 2, 3, and 4 are going to have no decreases. So row 5 in this section is going to have another decrease, just like we did there. So if you want to see the decrease again, join back in and I will show you one more time, and then you can continue on until you've done as many rows as you need to do in this section, which for me, doing a small is 20 rows, but this is how many you'll need to do for the other sizes. Okay, so now I'm almost up to the end of the 4th row in this section since we did the decrease. So I did the decrease on row 1 of this section, and now I'm up to the 4th row, but you will be doing the reverse of whatever you did for the start of this panel. So whatever you did here, just do it in reverse. And so I'm just going to do 1 back loop slip stitch into those last 3 stitches. Then I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and then now I'm going to do a decrease into those first 2 stitches, because this is now the 4th row since I started doing the decrease. So I'm going to go into that first stitch, yarn over, pull through, and into that second stitch, yarn over, pull through 2. So now I'm going to continue doing my rows of back loop slip stitches with a decrease at the start of every 4th row in this section until I've done as many rows as I did for the first section, which was 20 rows. So because I did the 5 increases on this first half of the front panel, I'm going to be doing 5 decreases on this part of the panel. So I'm going to be doing the decreases on row 1, row 5, row 9, row 13, and row 17, and then continue on to 20.
So once you finish the back panel, you'll need to go ahead and do that first shoulder chunk again. So for the size small, that was the first 20 rows, but you'll just do the same that you did for your back panel. And once you get to the end of that first chunk, instead of going straight across the back, we're going to start bringing it down for the neckline. So go back to that part and finish that section, and then join back in at the video here, and I'll show you how to do the neckline. I will leave timestamps in the description, so hopefully that will make it easier to jump around.
Okay, so now for the front panel, you should have done exactly what you did for the back panel, and I've got my 20 rows, but you'll have as many rows as you need for your size. And this is row 20, so I'm just going to do an increase into this last stitch here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to chain up 1, and this is the same for both front panels, so the left and the right front panel is going to be the same. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a decrease into the top of this stitch. I know it seems weird that we just did an increase in this row, now we're going to do a decrease in this row, so we didn't really need to do either of them, but I'm trying to keep it streamlined because different sizes will end on a different row. So some of the sizes will not end on an increase row, and I just want to make it consistent. So if you don't want to do the increase and the decrease, you can just do a straight row, but I'm now going to do a decrease into the first 2 back loops. So into that first back loop, I'm going to insert my hook, yarn over, pull through, and now into that next back loop, I'm going to insert, yarn over, pull through, and then I'm going to pull through the 2 loops on the hook. So now I'm just going to go down the rest of the row doing 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch with no more decreases in this row. Then when we get to the end, we're going to chain up 1 as normal, turn around and come all the way back up to the top doing our back loop slip stitches. When we get to the top, we're going to do a decrease at the end. So from here on out till the end of the front panels, you're going to need to do a decrease at the start of the odd numbered rows and at the end of the even numbered rows. So that's for all sizes. So this is an odd numbered row here. This is row 21 for me. So I'm doing a decrease at the start of the row. And when I come back up to the top, so that will be the end of row 22, I'm going to do a decrease. So I will go down the rest of this row, come back up to the top, and we will do our decrease for rows 22 and 23, or whichever row you're doing for your size. Okay, so now I am almost back at the top of row 22 for me, or the second row in this decrease section for the neckline. And I've got 3 stitches left, so I'm just going to do 1 back loop slip stitch into that first back loop, And now into those last 2 stitches of the row, I'm going to do another decrease. So into one, pull through, and into that second one, yarn over, pull through, and pull through 2. Now I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and we're going to straight away do another decrease. So I'm going to insert into that first back loop, straight into the second, yarn over, pull through, and pull through 2. So now I'm going to go down the rest of the row, and I'm going to keep doing the rows with a decrease at the start of the odd numbered rows and at the end of the even numbered rows, and that is going to start angling this panel down the front to make a V neckline for our button-up vest. This is how many rows you're going to need to do for each of the sizes.
For a size extra small, it will be 22 rows, a small is 25 rows, a medium is 28 rows, a large is 31 rows, XL is 34 rows, 2XL is 37 rows, and 3XL is 40 rows. And if you're using a different hook and yarn size, these are the centimetre and inch measurements, so just do as many rows as you need to do until you have reached that measurement for your size.
I am making this in a size small, so I'm going to need to do 25 rows in this section. So go ahead with how many rows you need to do for your size. So once you have finished your rows in the neckline section, your panel should be looking a little something like this. So it is flat along the bottom, and we've got the slight shoulder angle and the much steeper neck angle. And you're going to need to make 2 of these. So both the front right and the front left panel are going to be identical. So you can go ahead and make another identical pattern to this one. Okay, so once you've finished all 3 panels, you should have 1 back panel and 2 identical side panels. All you need to do is lay the front panels on top of the back panel and stitch along the top of the shoulder. You just want to make sure that you're matching up the increases from this first shoulder chunk, and you stop stitching when you get to the top of both the front and the back panel. So you just need to line up the rows. Because all the panels are identical, it doesn't matter which panel you put on which side or which way they're facing, but if you did make a mistake or that's more obvious from one side, then I would recommend putting that on the outside now, so then when you stitch it up, you can flip it in the other way and it will hide the stitches a little bit better. I don't normally show the mistakes that I make while I'm working on a project, because most of the time if I make a mistake I catch it pretty quickly and I go back and fix it, and it's normally at a time when I'm not filming. But this one I actually missed that I stuffed up one of the stitches here, and I didn't see it until I was almost at the end, and I really didn't want to go back and do it again because from the other side it looks fine. You can't tell that there's an issue. It's just from this side. So if you're also like me and you sometimes make mistakes and you don't catch them early enough, don't worry.
Okay, so this is where it gets a bit different if you were wanting to make the cardigan and not just the vest by itself. In this part of the video, I'm showing you how to make the vest and attach all the trim, but actually if you're making the cardigan, I would advise making the arms next. So now that you've got the 2 front panels and the back panel, then make the sleeves and attach the sleeves on. In the sleeve section, I do explain the best way that I think would be to stitch everything up together. So if you're making the cardigan as a full, check that out to decide if you want to do it that way rather than make the full vest first and then attach the sleeves later. But you can definitely still do that, and I show you how to do that in the video. So either way is fine, but I just wanted to let you know. I tried my top on at this point so that I could work out how close to my underarm I wanted it to be closed up. So you could definitely do this too, or if you don't want to, I will give you the stitch count and the centimetre and inch measurements.
So I measured where I put in my stitch marker, and it is 16 stitches from the bottom, but if you used a different hook size or a different yarn size to me, it is around 11 centimeters or 4.5 inches. So you can measure it on yourself, but if you don't feel like doing that, you can do the same as me, which is 11 centimeters or 4.5 inches.
And that's the measurement for all sizes, as the larger tops are a little bit longer, and that also makes the armhole a little bit bigger.
So now I'm just going to take my darning needle and my yarn and stitch up up to the 16th stitch, which is where I've got my stitch marker. So you can just go ahead and seam up both of your sides as well, and also make sure that you have the good sides in. So this will be my good side and that's my good side, and they're facing each other. So just like we did for the shoulder, you can now stitch up the side. And then we're going to get started on the trim. For the trim, I'm actually going to use a 6mm hook instead of an 8mm hook. And this is mostly just because single crochet stitches are a bit bigger and gappier than the slip stitches, and so I don't want the trim to be too gappy. But if you only have one hook, that's fine. You could definitely use the same hook for both. I just wanted my slip stitches to be a bit more loose and relaxed so that they wouldn't be too firm. So to get started on the ribbing that goes around the bottom of the top, we're just going to grab our yarn and our 6mm hook, make a slip knot, and I'm going to do a chain up of 10. This is the same for all sizes. So I'm not going to stitch into the last chain that we did, or the closest chain to the hook. I'm going to skip that one and use it to turn, and we're going to do single crochets. So into that first stitch, I'm going to insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, and pull through both of the loops on the hook. So into that next chain, I'm going to insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through both of the stitches. Then you're just going to go down the rest of the row, doing single crochets. And last one. Once you get to the end, you just need to chain up one, turn around, and now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to go into the back loop only. So this is the front loop, the closest one to your body. This is the back loop, so we're going to go into that back loop only and do a single crochet. So now we're just going to go down the rest of the row doing back loop single crochets, and when you get to the end, we're going to chain up one like we did at the end of the last row, turn around and keep doing rows of back loop single crochets until the band is long enough to reach all the way around the bottom of your top. I'm going to make this band slightly smaller than the bottom of my top so that it gets pulled a little bit tighter, but if you want it to be the exact same width, that's fine. It just won't pull the bottom of the top tight, so it just depends what you want. For this hook and yarn size, this is the number of rows that you're going to need to do for all of the sizes.
For a size extra small, it's 92 rows, a small is 104 rows, a medium is 116, a large is 128, an XL is 140, 2XL is 152, and 3XL is 164. And I've also put the centimetre and the inch measurements, so for using a different hook and yarn size, you can just keep going until you hit that measurement for your size.
I'm making it in a size small, so I'm going to do 104 rows. Once you have finished as many rows as you need to do, it's going to be quite a long band, and mine is 104 rows, so it goes quite a long way. And zooming out a little bit, what you're going to need to do is connect this band to the bottom of your top. So you want to start it on one side of the front panel, and you're just going to stitch it all the way around to pass the back and to connect again at the front. So the best thing to do is to put in a couple of stitch markers. So you want some stitch markers here, and then you want to stretch it out evenly and put some stitch markers on the two sides where you've connected the front panel to the back panel. This is going to make sure that it gets stretched out evenly. So grab your darning needle and your stitch markers and stitch the bottom band onto your vest, making sure that it's stretched out as evenly as possible the whole way around.
So now for the trim to go around the neckline.
We're going to start off the same by creating a slip knot. Insert your hook, and now you need to chain up 6. This is for all sizes. If you want a thicker trim around your neck, you can make a larger chain, and if you want the trim to be really tiny, you could do less than 6 chains, but I'm going to have a pretty standard one, so we're going to do 6. And now we're not going to stitch into that first stitch, we're going to use that as our turning chain, and I'm going to go into the second chain from the hook, and I'm going to do a single crochet. So insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through both of the loops on the hook. So into the next one we're going to insert, yarn over, pull through, and yarn over, pull through those 2 stitches. So now you just go down the rest of the row doing single crochets, and you will have 5 single crochets in total because we used that first chain, or the last chain that we did, to turn around. So now I've got my 5 single crochets. We're just going to chain up 1, turn our work, and now we're going to do back loops again. So just the same as for the slip stitches, we're going to go into that back loop only. So insert into the back loop only and a single crochet. So now you're just going to go ahead and do rows of back loop single crochets until you've done as many rows as you need to do for this to reach all the way from the bottom of your top around your neck and down the other side. And you will want to stop before you get to the end because we're going to put in buttonholes. So these are the number of stitches that you'll need to do depending on the size that you made.
For an extra small, it's 90, a small is 95, a medium is 100, a large is 105, XL is 110, 2XL is 115, and 3XL is 120. And here are also the centimetre and inch measurements. If you're using a different size hook and yarn, just keep going until you reach that measurement for your size. I am making this top in a size small, so I'm going to do 95 rows.
So now I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and you just keep going with the single crochets until you've done as many rows as you need to do.
Alright, so now I've got my 95 rows.
And it's looking something a little like this. So it's going to go from one end around the neck and back down to the other, but we are going to need to make some buttonholes. I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to do a back loop single crochet into those first 2 stitches, chain up 1 and skip this stitch, and then do 2 single crochets into those last 2 stitches. So to do that, we're going to go in through the back loop only, single crochet, and 1 more. So now I'm going to skip this stitch and I'm going to do a chain instead, and I'm going to do a single crochet into those last 2 stitches. So that's our first buttonhole. So you can see there's a bit of a gap, and that is where our button's going to fit. If you've got your buttons already picked out for this, you might want to just check and make sure that they're going to fit through that hole. If they're not, you could leave 2 free, so you do 2 chains and skip 2 stitches instead. But this should probably fit most buttons because I can fit my finger through there. Okay, so now I'm going to chain up 1, turn around. So now we are going to go ahead and do
9 normal rows.
If you want your buttons spaced further apart, you can leave more rows in between your buttons. I'm doing 3 buttons, but if you only wanted to do 2, you could space your buttons a bit further apart. And also just going into that chain. So there's the chain in that previous row, just like a normal back loop stitch, you're just going to go through what looks like the back loop of that chain. So that is my first row, chain up 1. So now I'm just going to do
8
more rows of single crochet, and then we're going to do our next row with a buttonhole.
So now we've got 10 rows including the buttonhole, or 9 without.
And you can see here is the buttonhole. If you are finding it hard to keep track, just pop in a stitch marker so that you don't lose track of your buttonholes. Now we're going to do our next buttonhole row. So I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and we're going to do the same thing. Back loop single crochet in the first 2 stitches, chain, and then back loop single crochet in the last 2 stitches. So I'll go ahead and do those first 2, chain up 1, skip that 3rd stitch, and 2 back loop singles. So now we're going to do the exact same thing again, chain up 1 and
9 more regular rows.
Then we're going to do our last buttonhole stitch and then 2 more rows, but I will take you through that if you want to see. So now we're going to do our last buttonhole. So I'm going to chain up 1 and do the same thing that we just did for the previous 2 buttonholes. And now I'm going to chain up 1, and we're just going to do 2 regular rows with back loop single crochets. So same thing that we did before, but instead of 6 rows, I'm just going to do 2 rows, and that is going to finish off our neckline trim. Alright, so once you've finished, you just need to chain up 1, and you're going to need to pull a fairly long tail. We're going to use the tail to stitch the neckline trim on. So once your tail is long enough, you can just cut off the end, and we're going to use that to stitch it to our top. We're going to stitch down our neckline trim. So basically you're going to grab your neckline trim and connect that to the bottom of your waistband ribbing, and it's going to go all the way around your neck. And you also want to make sure that this is stretched pretty evenly all the way around, though I would recommend pulling it a little bit tighter around the back of the neck just to make sure that the neck hole is not going to start gaping and this isn't going to stick up. So basically you'll need to put in a stitch marker at the bottom here so stitch this on first, but basically you're going to put a stitch marker in here and a stitch marker in here, and then you want to stretch it evenly around the back of the neck and put in a couple of stitch markers and then stitch it down with your darning needle. So once you have finished stitching on your trim, we just need to add buttons and then we're done. So I'm going to find the buttonholes, and I've got one here. There's my next one and my first one. So the best way I've found to do it is to line up with the buttonhole side of the trim on top of the non-buttonhole side of the trim. Find that buttonhole, grab your button, and I found these cute little ones that have like little oranges, and thread it with your yarn. It'll depend a little bit what style button you're using, how easy it's going to be to thread it before you stitch it on. And then I'm going to grab my needle, and I'm going to line up the button with the hole, and I'm going to insert my needle into the hole so it goes through both layers. So basically going to pull that button layer over, and now you know exactly where your button needs to go. Obviously there's lots of different ways to do this, so do it whichever way you prefer, but I just find that the easiest to make sure that it's lined up. And I'm going to do a couple extra stitches just for a bit more security, and then I'm going to tie the 2 ends in a knot or a bow, depending on if you might want to change the buttons around. You could just tie it in a bow, otherwise you can just tie it in a double knot and cut off the excess. So once you've done that, you will have finished your vest.
So to get started on making the arm, I'm still going to be using my 8mm hook and the same yarn that I use for the rest of the vest, and we're just going to need to grab the end and make a slip knot. Now I'm going to insert my hook and chain up 21. The chain of 21 is going to be the same for all sizes if you're making a fairly standard sleeve length. I will leave the centimetre and inch measurements for each of these sections so that if you're using a different yarn or different hook size, you can make it in a similar size. But if you have particularly long arms or short arms, you could take away a couple of stitches from this or add stitches. We'll also be adding a ribbing that goes around the wrist, so you can slightly adjust the length of the sleeve by making the ribbing a bit wider or narrower. Your foundation chain should be measuring around 16 centimeters or 6 1/4 inches. So now I have chained up 21, and I am going to use that last chain that we did to turn around. So I'm not going to stitch into that last chain, I'm going to stitch into the second chain from the hook, So inserting into the second chain from the hook, I'm going to do slip stitches. So it'll be the same as the majority of the vest. So I'm going to yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. So into that next chain, insert, yarn over, pull through again. So now I'm just going to go down the rest of the row, doing one slip stitch into every chain until I get to the end, and then I will show you what to do for the next row. After you've finished the first row, this is the approximate measurement that it should be so far. It's a bit smaller than the chain measurement because the slip stitches have a tendency to pull the chain a bit tighter. Alright, and I'm just doing my last slip stitch. So because we use one of those chains to turn around, you should have 20 slip stitches in that row. So now we're going to chain up one, turn around, and we're going to go back to doing the back loop slip stitches. So for that, I'm going to insert into the back loop only, got the front loop closest to your body, the back loop furthest away, into the back loop only, and I'm going to do a slip stitch again. So yarn over, pull through again, and into that next back loop, insert, yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. Alright, now I'm going to keep going until I get to the end, and then we are going to add some more chains onto this arm measurement. So join back in when you get to the end of this row. Okay, and I'm just doing my last back loop slip stitch, and now we're going to chain up 11. And here are the centimetre and inch measurements for that chain if you need them. 11. Okay, so now I'm going to do what we did with our foundation chain. I'm not going to stitch into that first chain from the hook. I'm going to go into the second chain from the hook and do a slip stitch again. So going back down the rest of the row, doing one slip stitch into each of those 10 chains. So we did 11 chains, but one was to turn around. So you should have 10 stitches in total up until you get to the other 20 stitches that we already did. So we've got 2 more. Alright, so now when you get to the end of those 10 stitches, I'm back up to where we did the first lot of stitches, and I'm just going to continue going back into the back loop. So you want to make sure that this is not twisted around, that it's sitting flat, just like that, and I'm going to go into that next back loop and go down the rest of the row. So you should have 30 stitches in total now. We've got 20 in that first section we did, and then 10 from that next section, and we're going to do that exact thing all again. So those 2 rows that we just did, we're going to do that again. We're going to add another 10 stitches, so we're going to be doing another 11 chains, and then once we've done that, we're going to do it one more time. So in total, you'll have 50 stitches once you've done your 3 increases with the 10 added stitches. So I will show you how to do it, but if you want to go ahead and keep going and adding 10 stitches until you get to 50, you can do that. So when you're at the end, chain up 1, turn around, and I'm doing my back loop slip stitches all the way back up to the top, where we will add our next lot of stitches. Alright, and just doing that last stitch. And now, just like we did for this part before, I'm going to chain up 11 again. And I've just popped the measurements back up on the screen for that chain. 11. And I'm going to skip that chain closest to the hook again, using that to turn around and go into the second chain from the hook with my slip stitches. So I'm going to do 10 slip stitches into the chain until we get to our previous back loop slip stitches, where I can do more back loop slip stitches. So doing my last one into the chain, and just like before, we want to make sure that this part here is not twisted, so these stitches should all be lying flat. So now I'm going to go ahead with my back loop slip stitches into the next 30 stitches from the previous row, And when you get to the end, we're going to do the exact same thing that we just did for those last 2 lots of 2 rows. You're going to chain up 1, do your slip stitches going all the way up. This time you'll have 40 slip stitches. Then you need to do 11 chains again, turn around and come back down doing your slip stitches, so you will have 50 stitches in total. Join back in once you are up to 50 stitches, and I will show you the next section of the arm. Okay, so now I've got my 3 lots of the increases to make 50 stitches in total. So I had 20 in this first section, 10, 10 and 10 to make 50, and here are the centimetre and inch measurements of all of those sections in case you want to make it with different size, book or yarn. And this is also the width of that section. So from that first foundation chain to where we're up to now, section is 3.3 centimeters or 1¼ inches. So once you've got those 50 stitches, this next row or next couple of rows is just going to be straight rows with 50 back loop slip stitches. You can go ahead and chain up 1, turn around and do 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, going all the way down to the end. Once you get to the end, chain up 1, turn around and come all the way back with 1 back loop slip stitch into each stitch. And these are the number of rows in this section that you'll need to do for each of the sizes, as well as the centimetre and inch measurements. These are the measurements for the entire underarm section. So if you're using a different size hook and yarn, just make sure that the entire underarm section is this width. So for me, making a size small, I'm going to do 4 rows in this section. So once you have done as many rows as you need to do for your size in this section with no increases or decreases, just straight rows with the 50 slip stitches, join back in and I will show you how we're going to do our increases for the shoulder portion. Okay, so I have done my 4 rows in this section with no increases or decreases, and I'm back at the top again. And you want to make sure that you are doing this next section with the increases at this end. So the thicker end is going to be where our shoulder is, it's going to be attached to the top of the vest, and this thin end is going to be where our wrist is. So you want to make sure that we're always doing the increases on this side, and this side is going to remain going flat with no increases or decreases. So just what we've been doing so far, chain up 1, turn around and go back with no increase or decrease at this wrist side always. It's going to end up being completely flat. So at this end, I've just done my 4th row in this no increase, no decrease section, but we are actually going to increase this row. But once you've made it all the way up to the end, we're just going to add 1 extra stitch. So now that I've made it all the way up to the end, and no matter what size you're making, you should be at this end. Instead of chaining up and turning around straight away, I'm going to add 1 more stitch. So I'm going to go back into that same back loop that I just did my slip stitch into. So insert into that same slip stitch, yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. So we just did an increase of 1. So I'll just show you that I've got 2 stitches in there in case you want to see. So I've just undone those 2 stitches, and you can see that there's 1 stitch at the end there that's free now. So I'm going to do 2 back loop slip stitches. So there's my first. I'm going to go straight back in and do another. Okay, so now I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and I'm going to go back to doing 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So for every 2 rows that we do, we're going to do 1 stitch increase, or in other words, we're going to do 1 increase on every 2nd row. So this row is not going to have any increases or decreases. When we get to the end, we're going to chain up 1, turn around and come back up to this side as normal, and we're going to do another increase on this way up, and then no increases on the way back down. So I will show you that again. So once you get to the end, chain up 1, turn around and come back up with no increases or decreases, and I will show you this 1 more time, and then we'll go ahead and do a chunk of them to bring this up to the top of our shoulder. So join back in when you get back up to this end. Okay, so I'm coming back up to this end again, and we've got all of our remaining stitches, so I'm just going to put one back loop slip stitch into every stitch, but I'm going to put 2 back loop slip stitches into that last stitch. So into that last stitch I'm going to do 1 back loop slip stitch and straight back in to the same stitch of the previous row, another back loop slip stitch. So that's our second increase. Now I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and this row is going to have no increases. I'm going to put 1 back loop slip stitch into the first and 1 into the second, and so on all the way back down. So now you can go ahead and continue doing this pattern of an increase on every second row, or every time you come up to this end you do a decrease, turn around, come down, no increase, and continue that. So we'll be adding 1 extra stitch every 2 rows. This underarm section will be a little bit different depending on your size. The increase section will be the same because we want to add the same number of stitches no matter what size you're making, and then the next section after that will be a little bit different depending on your size. You'll need to do 20 rows with the increases. So it'll be 20 rows but 10 increases in total because we're doing the increases on every second row. You can also come back up to the top of that 21st row because that's where we will be starting the next section. But once you've done 20, and that's for all sizes, join back in and I will show you the next section. Okay, so I have done 20 rows in this section and I've got 10 increases because I did an increase for 1 increase for every 2 rows. And this row going down this way was row 20, and I've just come back up with row 21, keeping it all flat at the bottom with no increases or decreases. So this is row 21 here. And for the next few rows, we're going to be doing no increases or decreases. So for me, making a size small, that's going to be 6 rows. So this row here is the first one. I'm going to do 5 more rows after that with no increases or decreases, but this is the number of rows that you'll need to do depending on your size. And if you want to make sure that you've got the right number of stitches, we had 50 in this section here, and with the 10 increases, you should now have 60 stitches. If you're using a different hook and yarn size, I will leave the centimeter and inch measurements for the length as well as for the size of this section. So for this row, being the first row of my 6 rows in the no increase section, I'm just going to put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch with no increases this time. So just like we did for that very first section, minus all of this stuff. So that's 1 into each, chain up 1, turn around, and go back down doing 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch of the previous row with the same number of stitches in each row for this section. So I'm going to go ahead until I have done 6 rows with no increases or decreases, and go ahead and do as many as you need to do for your size, and then join back in and we're going to start doing some decreases to mirror the increases that we did on the other side. So join back in when you get there. I've finished my 6 rows in that section, and you will have done as many rows as you need to do for your size. So I've got this one going down here is the 6th row, and I've come up with the next row. So if you're counting from the start, it would be row 7, but this is the first row of the next section, so it's going to be row 1 again. So I've done as many rows with no increases or decreases that I need to do, and now we're going to start doing decreases. So I've come back up to the top so that I can show you the next step, but if you're at the bottom, just come back up before you do this next bit to make sure you're doing the decreases at the correct end. So I have 3 stitches left of this previous row, so into that next one I'm just going to do a regular back loop slip stitch, and into those last 2 stitches I'm going to do a decrease. I'm going to go into that first back loop, yarn over, pull through, and I'm going to go straight into that next back loop. Yarn over, pull through, so you should have 3 loops on the hook, and now I'm going to pull that first loop through the next 2 loops. So that's a back loop decrease. Now I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and go back to putting 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch of the previous row. So no decreases on this row. Just like with the increase section, we're only going to be doing the decreases for every second row. So we're going to do 20 rows in this section again and that will be 10 decreases, which should bring us from 60 stitches back to 50. So you can go ahead and finish this row. When you get to the end, chain up 1 as usual, turn around, come back up to the top, and I'll show you that decrease one more time if you want to see it. Otherwise you can go ahead until you have done 20 rows in this section with a total of 10 decreases. Okay, so now you should have made it back up to the top of that next row. So this is the third row in this 20 row section for me. So I've come back up to the top and I'm going to do the decrease on this row. So again, I've got the 3 stitches left and I'm just going to do my last regular back loop slip stitch, and into those last 2 stitches I'm going to do a decrease. So in through that first back loop, yarn over, pull through, and straight into that second back loop, yarn over, pull through, and now I'm going to pull that first loop through the other 2 loops. So there's our decrease again. So you chain up 1, turn around, and keep going doing the back loop slip stitches into every stitch. So keep doing this pattern until you have 20 rows in this section with a total of 10 decreases, because we are only doing the decrease once for every 2 rows. So join back in when you get to the end of this section. Okay, so now I have done my 20 rows with the decreases on every second row. So I've done 10 decreases in total in this section, and I'm going to get started on the next section. If you've just done the 20 rows, you should have ended up at the bottom, but I've gone ahead and come back up to the top as the first row of the next section, so I can show you what we're doing at the top here. So if you're at the bottom, go ahead and come back up to the top, and we're going to mirror what we did on the other side, rows with no increases or decreases, and then we're going to do our little ladder. So this row at the top here is going to have no increases or decreases. So I've come back up on the next row, on the first row for that next section, and when I get to the end, I'm just going to do 1 slip stitch, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, turn up 1, turn around, and continue doing 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, going all the way back down. When I get back to the top, I'm going to do the exact same thing and do no increases or decreases again, and do another row. And then after that, we're going to do our row with this first lot of decreases. For me making a size small, I'm going to do 5 rows in this section. So this first row that I've done where I've come all the way back up to the top is row 1. I'm currently doing row 2. So after this row, I'm going to do 3 more rows, which will bring us up to row 5, and that will bring us up to the top. These are the number of rows that you'll need to do depending on the size that you're making. So go ahead and do those rows and join back in, and I will show you the 10 stitch decreases. Okay, so I have made it to the end of the 5th row in this section, or this number of rows depending on the size that you're making. So I'm back up the top because it was an odd number, and I'm just going to do my last 2 back loop slip stitches into those last 2 stitches, no increases or decreases here. I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and now I'm going to go down the next row, putting 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch for the first 40 stitches. So if you prefer to count from the end, you can leave the last 10 stitches free, or you can count 40 as you go down the row. And when we get to 40, we're going to chain up 1 and turn around, but I will show you that when I get there. So I have done back loop slip stitches into the first 40 stitches in this row, and I have 10 stitches free. So right here on the 40th stitch, I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and go back up to the top. So we're basically going to do this exact same thing 3 times. So the next one, we're going to reduce by another 10 stitches, and then we're going to reduce by another 10 stitches again, and then we will have 20 stitches left, which is what we started with. So if you would like to see this 10 stitch reduction again, join back in when you get to
the end of this row and I will show you that again. Otherwise you can just reduce by 10 2 more times and then you will have finished your arm, or sleeve I should say. Okay, so now I'm back at the other end of the row. So that's this row where I did the 40 stitches and turned around. I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and this time I'm going to do back loop slip stitches into the first 30 stitches. So again, you can count 30 as you go down, or you can count 10 from this end and just stop there. So I'm going to go ahead and do 30 back loop slip stitches into the first 30 back loop slip stitches of the previous row. Alright, and now I've done back loop slip stitches into the first 30 stitches of this row. Chain up 1, turn around, and go back up to the top, doing 30 back loop slip stitches into every stitch of the previous row. When we get to the end, we're going to chain up 1, turn around, and do 20 stitches into the first 20 stitches. Alright, so back at the top again, and I'm going to do my last stitch, chain up 1, turn around, and do a back loop slip stitch into the first 20 stitches. If you are using a different size hook and a different size yarn, just make sure that you mirror what you did at the start of the arm. So if you did a different number of stitches in your sections for the start of the arm, make sure that you're doing the same number of stitches again. And I'll also leave the centimeter and inch measurements in case you needed a refresher about how long they were. All right, and stitch 20, chain up 1, turn around and go back up to the top, and then that'll be the end of our sleeve, and I will show you how to join the two sides together. And there we go. Chain up 1 and pull a loop. Ordinarily, I would recommend stitching on your sleeve while it's open before you stitch up the two sides together, but I've already made the vest, so I am going to stitch the sleeve up in half first, so lining it all up and stitching along there and then attaching it to my vest. But if you were making this jumper as a jumper and you didn't make the vest first and stitch it all up together already, I would do it another way, and I'll try to show you, even though my vest is already sewed together, I'll try to show you the way that is probably going to be the easiest. Though having said that, it doesn't matter. As long as all the sections are sewn up together, it doesn't matter what order you do it in, so don't stress too much. So I've got my vest here. This is the neck, this is the shoulder, and this is the underarm. So I would suggest stitching up the shoulder first. Don't stitch this up, so it's before you attach the ribbing. Do this before you attach the waistline ribbing. Attach this, don't attach this, and have it open up like this, so it would continue to go out the sides, but mine is stitched together. And you would grab your arm, and in the center of the arm, connect it to the center of the shoulder and stitch it up along the side. So you would pull it evenly on both sides and stitch it up this way. And then once you've done that, stitch up underneath the arm, as well as stitching the arm to the other side of the arm. I hope that makes sense. Basically, I would stitch up this bit first, then I would stitch the arm to the open panels, and then do this underarm section. But I am not going to do it that way because my vest is already done. So I am going to stitch up my arm. So you can do this with a darning needle if you like using darning needles, and if you don't want to, you can use your hook and do slip stitches, which is what I'm going to do because I've already got it all ready to go. But definitely, if you're running out of yarn, the darning needle way of just like hand sewing stitches is going to use up the least amount of yarn. So I am going to fold my arm in half, and it doesn't matter which side is the inside and which side is the outside because it's symmetrical. So if you made a mistake on one side and you want to cover it, put that side on the inside, otherwise it doesn't matter. So I'm going to grab both of my sides all lined up together, and it is pretty easy to tell if it's perfectly lined up stitch by stitch because we've got these like 10 stitch lots. So I'm going to insert my hook back into that loop, and I'm going to insert my hook through both panels. So I'm going to go into the back loop of this stitch in this panel and then through the first stitch on the other side of the panel, which this was the chains here and this was the stitches. Pull through and pull through again. So just like a regular slip stitch. Now I'm going to go into the loop of the next stitch, into the next stitch on the other panel, yarn over, pull through and pull through again. So now you can just go down the rest of the row, putting one slip stitch into every corresponding stitch on both of the panels. And when you get to the end, we are going to start on the ribbing for the arms, which is going to be exactly the same as the waist ribbing. It'll just be much shorter. So once you have stitched your two panels together, however you want to stitch them, join back in and I will show you the ribbing for the wrists. Okay, so now I'm getting started on the ribbing for around the wrist, and just like the ribbing for the waistband and the neckline, I'm using a 6mm hook instead of an 8mm hook. So you can also drop down a size or two if you're using a different hook size, because the stitches for the back loop single crochet are quite a bit bigger than the stitches for the back loop slip stitches. So now I'm going to make a slip knot, insert my hook, and I'm going to chain up 11. The chain and cuff will measure about 8 centimeters or 3 1/4 inches. So now I'm going to use that last chain that I did as my turning chain, so I'm not going to stitch into that. I'm going to go into the second chain from the hook and do a single crochet. So insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. Into the next one, insert, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 2. So just like the ribbing for the other sections, I'm going to go down the rest of the row doing my single crochets, and for this ribbing I'm going to have 10 stitches across. So 11 chains, with one of them being the turning chain, to make 10 single crochets. Okay, and now I'm going to chain up 1, turn around, and we're going to go back to doing back loop stitches. So this is the front loop close to your body, the back loop further away. I'm going to go into that back loop only and do a single crochet. So now you can go down the rest of the row doing the back loop single crochets. When you get to the end, chain up 1 and turn around just like we did, and keep doing this until this band is long enough to go around your wrist and fit comfortably. You don't want it to be too tight, but you also don't want it to be too baggy if you want to be able to pull up your sleeves at all. So this is the number of rows that you should do depending on the size that you're making. For me, making a small, I need to do 26 rows in this section. So just go ahead until you've done as many rows as you need to do for your size, and then join back in, and all we're going to do is stitch it onto the cuff, onto the end of the arm that we made, and then we are going to stitch it onto the body of our vest, and then we will have completed our cardigan. I have done my 26 rows and it's looking something like this. So I'm just going to chain up 1, and I'm going to use the slip stitches again to join the two panels together, but you can use a darning needle and stitch it together if you prefer to do that as well. So it doesn't really matter which side you put to which side, so just pick which way you want it to go, and I'm going to insert through that first side of the ribbing and then through other side, yarn over, pull through, and pull through again. Then I'm going to go into that next stitch along on the first side and the next stitch along on the second side, and continue doing slip stitches all the way down just like we did for the arm.
and chain up 1. So joining with slip stitches definitely makes it a little bit more bulky on the one side. So this is the inside here, and it's got a bit of extra bulk, and on the outside you'll have a bit of a ridge. So using a needle and stitching it like with a darning needle is definitely going to make it look flatter and smoother. It's just personal preference. So if you don't want it to be as bulky, use the darning needle and stitching method, and that is the method that I'm going to use to attach this cuff to the sleeve. So I'll show you how to do that now, and I'm going to pull a tail, and I want it to be approximately double the circumference of this. So I'm going to pull a loop and keep it doubled over because this is doubled over to measure. So yep, that makes it all the way around. So I can cut that off and grab a darning needle. Okay, so I've got my arm here. This is the shoulder up this end, and the end down here. So I'm going to leave the sleeve in the right way. So this is the inside here, this is the outside, it's in the right way. I'm going to go to the seam that we have under the arm, grab my cuff, and with the cuff the wrong way out, so this is the inside and this is the outside, I'm going to put the outside, which is in here, on the outside of this. So shove the sleeve inside of the cuff. So we've got the inside seam here and the inside seam here are on opposite sides. So basically right sides together is what I'm trying to say in a very convoluted way. So now I'm going to grab the tail that I have left, insert my darning needle, and now I'm basically just going to stitch the cuff onto the inside. So as you can see, the inside is quite bunchy and wrinkly compared with the cuff, so you're going to need to pull the cuff quite tight when you're stitching it to this. So I'd probably be doing 2 stitches into every row of this, into every 1 stitch of this, or approximately that, just to make sure that it's spread nice and evenly. You don't want to do stitch for stitch because you're going to end up having stitched the cuff on by the time you get halfway around this bit. So just make sure that you are stretching it out evenly, or as evenly as you can, and keep going until you get all the way back to the start. Okay, I'm coming up to the end. I just have a little gap left now, and I'm just going to stitch that up. If you're worried about it coming undone, you could tie a knot here if you want to, but otherwise you can just weave in your ends, and we are done with attaching the cuff to the arm. So when you turn it in the other way, it'll look like this, and as you can see, it's much flatter in profile and smoother than the slip stitches. So it's just your preference, whatever you prefer. Okay, so now we are going to attach our sleeve to the vest, and like I said before, if you haven't already assembled your vest first like I did, I would add the arm on the way that I suggested earlier. But if you've already made the vest and you're attaching the arm afterwards like I am, this is how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to turn my body of my vest inside out like this. So this is the sleeve and my vest is inside out. So I've got the gap here, and I'm going to grab my sleeve, which is the correct way in. So this is the outside, and I'm going to put that, I need to zoom out a little bit. So this is the sleeve here, and I'm going to put the sleeve through the vest. So this is the outside here, going through and closing it up. And now you can see the arm here. So it's right sides together as well. This is the outside and it's touching the outside. So I'm just going to go ahead and match up the seams, the one that goes down under the armpit and the one that goes along the arm. And if you have stitch markers, you can use them. So I'm going to put a stitch marker through here and through there, and then you can go all the way around the rest of the top, stretching the arm to make sure that it's going to fit in the armhole. Find the top middle of the sleeve, put a stitch marker in there and through the top of the sleeve, and then stretch it evenly around the rest of the sleeve. Now you can grab some yarn, and it can either be the end of the yarn if you had wanted to leave it on. This is from when I stitched up the arm. You could leave it on. I haven't left a long enough tail, so I'm going to grab some more and make sure that it's at least double, maybe double and a half of the hole that I'm stitching up. And start stitching. Just going to make sure that it's even up the side. And I'm going to go ahead and stitch away. Once you've finished stitching on both of your arms, you will have finished your cardigan. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it useful. If you make any of my creations, please feel free to tag me on Instagram at StephTashi_handmade, because I love to see what you've made. I'd also really appreciate it if you would consider hitting that subscribe button and the like button. See you in the next one.